The surveillance room was bathed in the cold glow of 16 monitors, each one showing a different corner of the Valenti compound. Rafael Valenti stood motionless in front of the screens, his broad shoulders framed by an open white shirt that revealed the muscled chest of a man who had clawed his way out of nothing and built an empire from blood and bone. He was 38 years old but looked carved from stone, his dark hair silvered at the temples, a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like a permanent record of a debt someone had paid in full. His hands rested on the control panel, each finger adorned with silver rings worn smooth by years of use, and his eyes moved across the monitors with the precision of a general surveying a battlefield. Behind him stood Rocco and Sal, lieutenants who had served Rafael for 15 years without question, men who understood that loyalty in his world meant your life was no longer your own. They shifted their weight, waiting, watching their boss the way soldiers watch a sky before a storm. On Monitor 7, a figure moved through the shelter's kitchen. Isabella Hartley. Maid. Night shift. Unremarkable face, worn hands, the kind of person the world learned to look through rather than at. But for 3 weeks, Rafael had been watching her on these screens, and something about her pattern did not sit right. Something was wrong. Something was hidden. Rafael leaned forward. His jaw tightened, the scar on his face deepening as his muscles tensed. "She's careful," Rocco said, his voice thick as gravel. "Too careful. The way she moves. Always checking. Always looking over her shoulder. No one is that clean unless they're hiding something dirty," Sal added, stepping closer to the monitors, his dark suit catching the fluorescent light. Rafael did not respond. He watched as Isabella appeared on Monitor 4, moving through the back alley behind the shelter at 2:17 in the morning. Her breath was visible in the frozen air, small clouds of white that disappeared into the darkness. She was carrying a bag. Brown canvas, worn at the edges. She was looking over her shoulder again. Always looking. Always cautious. In Rafael's world, people who moved like that were either running from something or delivering something dangerous. She was meeting someone. The scene cut to Monitor 9. A parked car, engine running, driver's side window rolled down. A stranger in the darkness. Isabella approached with the bag held close to her ribs. She handed it over. The stranger pressed something into her palm, money, or information, or a threat. Her shoulders caved inward. She pulled her thin jacket tighter against the November wind that tore through the alley like a blade wrapped in ice. Who is she meeting? Rafael's voice was low and solid like an oath, the kind of voice that made men move or die. "We've been tracking it," Rocco said. "Different car every night. Different location. Same time always. 2 a.m. Exactly 2 a.m. She's regular as clockwork." "She's running a game," Sal said. The confidence in his voice suggested a conclusion, but Rafael knew better. Conclusions were dangerous things. They got men killed. Monitor 12 flickered. Isabella was inside the shelter now, moving through the hallway toward the chapel. Her footsteps made no sound on the tile floor. She had learned how to move like a ghost, like someone trying not to disturb sleeping children. The chapel door opened. She slipped inside. Rafael's hand moved across the control panel. The view shifted to camera 13, the one hidden in the ceiling beam of the chapel, the one installed 3 weeks ago when Lily first arrived at the shelter with a name and a face that belonged to his brother's betrayal. Isabella sat down on a wooden pew, and in the darkness, her hands trembled as she opened the canvas bag. Books. She pulled out worn paperbacks with crinkled spines and dog-eared pages. Charlotte's Web. The Secret Garden. Bridge to Terabithia. Each one handled with the care of someone touching something sacred. In the corner of the chapel, on a thin mat that smelled like mold and broken promises, a 7-year-old girl slept. Lily. Rafael's daughter. The child his own brother Antonio had sold to the Corsetti family 3 months ago like she was a piece of property, a bargaining chip in a war Rafael was still fighting. Rafael had spent 6 months searching for her, 6 months of sleepless nights and careful violence, before a tip from inside the Corsetti organization had led him to a public shelter in New York where no one asked questions. The girl had been there for 8 days before Isabella Hartley started working nights. Isabella opened the first book and began to read in a whisper so soft it could barely be heard, even through the microphone hidden in the chapel's corner. In a stablefly's web, Charlotte A. Kavatica was an engineer. She believed in hard work and discipline. She was an artist, too. Her web was the most beautiful thing in the entire barn. The camera captured the moment Lily opened her eyes. The child did not cry out. She did not seem confused by the woman reading to her in the darkness. Instead, the girl's body relaxed into the sound of Isabella's voice, into words about friendship and loyalty and love that survives death itself. Lily moved her small hand across the mat until it was close enough to touch Isabella's coat. Rafael's hands had gone completely still. For 3 weeks, Isabella Hartley had been close to his daughter. Close enough to whisper in her ear. Close enough to know her fears, her dreams, the sound of her breathing in the dark. If she was working for the Corsetti family, if this tenderness toward Lily was part of the trap, if every story she read was building a foundation of trust that would shatter when they came for his daughter again, then Rafael would put a bullet in her himself. He would do it slowly. He would do it in front of her own children. "She's getting close to the kid," Sal observed, stating the obvious in the way men do when they know their boss has already seen everything. "Too close," Rocco agreed. Rafael's jaw clenched tighter. On the monitor, Isabella was still reading, her voice carrying Wilbur's desperation and Charlotte's quiet certainty that love is stronger than time. The girl's hand found Isabella's sleeve and held on. "Find out who she's meeting," Rafael said, his voice dropping into the register that made Rocco and Sal exchange a glance neither had seen in 15 years. The glance that meant blood was coming. "Find out who she works for. I want names, locations, and family connections. If she is playing me, if she is using my daughter as bait, I want to know before the sun comes up." Both men nodded and turned to leave, but Rafael's voice stopped them at the door. "And find out why a woman with nothing to her name is buying books at 2 a.m., he said. "No one does that unless they are either insane or trying to save someone." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds before Rocco and Sal departed. Rafael turned back to monitor 13. Isabella was reading the final page now, her voice breaking slightly on the words about how friendship and mortality are woven together like threads in a web. Lily had fallen asleep again, but her small hand was still gripping the fabric of Isabella's maid uniform, holding on to the only constant thing in her shattered world. Rafael stood alone in the surveillance room, surrounded by 16 screens that showed him the movement of his empire, his men in black SUVs, his operations running like a perfectly programmed machine, his world ordered by loyalty and violence and the absolute certainty that love is the most dangerous weapon anyone can possess. But his eyes were locked on monitor 13, on a woman he did not know reading to a child he had not known existed until 3 months ago. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone you love, someone who knows what it means to be unseen, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. We are only at the beginning, and what's about to unfold will change everything. Now, let us go back. Let us go back to the frozen winter night when Isabella Hartley made a choice that would collide her world with Rafael Valenti's in ways neither of them could ever predict. Let us go back to where it all began. 3 days before Rafael Valenti's black Mercedes would crash into a lamppost outside St. Catherine's shelter, Isabella Hartley sat on a wooden crate in the basement and counted $17. Crumpled bills. 2 5s, 7 1s, scattered across her open palm like the last pieces of a life that had already shattered. The basement room smelled like mold creeping up cement walls, like industrial bleach mixed with something darker, the smell of broken promises and rent that would never be paid. Her 2 children slept on cardboard boxes topped with sleeping bags 3 feet away. Emma, 9 years old, curled on her side, one arm stretched toward her mother even in sleep. Daniel, 6, his small frame tucked into himself like a question mark, his breathing shallow and steady in the November cold. Isabella's hands trembled as she folded the bills back into her pocket. $17. This was everything. 3 weeks of night shifts mopping marble floors at the shelter, scrubbing bathrooms with her knees on cold tile, eating the leftover soup the kitchen staff put aside for her instead of throwing it away. $17, and somewhere in a filing cabinet 7 floors above her head, a hospital was calling 14 times a day asking when she would pay $65,000. $65,000. The number felt like a blade wrapped in ice. Her late husband David's medical bills. Chemotherapy that had not saved him. Radiation treatments that had only prolonged his suffering by 8 months. Isabella had sat beside his hospital bed and held his hand and watched the machines beep out the final hours of a man she had married at 22, a man who had loved her fiercely until the cancer rewired his brain and turned him into someone else, someone with fists instead of words, someone whose pain came out as rage. 8 years of that. 8 years of learning how to flinch before the blow landed, how to make herself smaller, how to explain bruises to her children in ways that did not mention their father's name. The hospital bills came after the funeral. "Come immediately," they said. $65,000 or we will pursue legal action. Then Marcus Webb appeared. Marcus Webb owned the building where Isabella had rented a studio apartment with her children for 4 years. $300 a month, paid on time, every time, even when there was no money for food. She had made that apartment beautiful with what little she had, a blue blanket over the window to make it feel like a sky, drawings her children had made taped to the walls, a single photograph of David in his military uniform before the cancer, before the drinking, before the man in the photograph became someone unrecognizable. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. But it was not Marcus who delivered it. It was his lawyer, a thin man with a thin smile who explained that the building was changing hands, that Isabella had 30 days to vacate, that the new owner had already leased the space to a boutique fitness studio. Yoga classes where her kitchen used to be. Spinning bikes where Emma had done her homework. She had packed everything that mattered into a single garbage bag and walked to St. Catherine's shelter with her 2 children holding her hands on either side. Sister Margaret, the head administrator, had given her the basement room, the only space available, the room where the old pipes groaned at night and the windows sat at ground level showing only the feet of pedestrians passing on the street above. But it was free. It was shelter. It was survival. Then Marcus Webb showed up in the laundry room on a Thursday. The washing machines were running. 3 of them, their metal drums turning with a rhythmic metallic grinding that made it hard to hear anything else. Isabella was folding towels, her calloused hands moving mechanically through the motion she had repeated 10,000 times. She did not hear him come in. She only felt the shift in the air, the way a room changes when someone dangerous enters it. Marcus Webb was 38 years old, though something in his face suggested corruption older than his years. His hair was slicked back with product that caught the fluorescent light. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Isabella's annual salary, navy blue with thin silver pinstripes. A gold watch caught the light when he moved. His cologne smelled like expensive leather and cruelty. "Isabella," he said. Not a greeting. A summons. She turned. Her stomach tightened. "We need to talk about your husband's debt," he said, stepping closer. The washers drowned out everything else. No one would hear if she screamed. "I bought it from the hospital." "What?" Her voice came out small. "Your husband's medical bills. $65,000. I purchased the debt from Memorial Hospital 3 weeks ago. They were going to sell it to a collection agency. I got there first." He smiled, and his teeth were very white. "I always move fast when I see an opportunity." Isabella backed against the washing machine behind her. The vibration of it moved through her spine. "I don't have that kind of." "I know exactly what you have." His eyes traveled from her feet to her face, the way a man looks at something he intends to own. "I had you followed. You counted $17 on a crate this morning. I watched the report myself." The world tilted. Someone had been watching her count her money. Someone had documented it, reported it, delivered the information to this man. "You have 10 days, Marcus said, stepping closer. close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, feel the heat radiating from his body. 10 days to produce $65,000, Isabella. Or I own the debt. And debts are paid one way or another. She did not understand at first. Not really. But something in the way he was looking at her body, at her face, at the fear in her eyes, told her exactly what kind of payment he had in mind. I'll find the money, she whispered. No, you won't. He laughed then, and it sounded like breaking glass. You'll find yourself in my office. Or on the street with your children. Those are your options, Isabella. And you have 10 days to choose. He left. She heard his footsteps on the tile floor, heard him say something to Sister Margaret in the hallway above, something about checking the building's structural integrity, something professional and false. Then the basement door closed and Isabella was alone again with the sound of the washing machines and her own breathing, which had become rapid and shallow, almost frantic. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold concrete floor. One hand pressed against her stomach. The other gripped the edge of her shirt, holding the fabric in her fist so tightly her knuckles went white. 10 days. That night, Isabella worked her shift. She had worked every night for 3 weeks without missing a single hour, and she would work every night for the next 10 days, and none of it would matter because there was no way to earn $65,000 when you made $9 an hour, and most nights the residents of the shelter did not have money for tips. She was mopping the marble floors of the main hall around 11 p.m. when Sister Margaret rushed toward her, her face flushed, her breathing rapid. Isabella, we have an emergency. There is a man outside. He has collapsed against the front gate. He is bleeding. Sister Margaret's voice trembled. He's bleeding very badly. Isabella set down her mop and ran. The November night was sharp. Frost had hardened across the sidewalk, and her breath came out in clouds of white vapor. The stars were visible overhead, clear and diamond bright, the kind of night sky that city dwellers rarely got to see. Everything was silent except for the sound of her footsteps, the leather of her worn shoes scraping against the concrete. The black Mercedes was embedded in the lamppost to the left of the shelter's front gate. The headlights were still on, casting long shadows across the street. The driver's door hung open. And slumped against the seat, his body half in the car and half out, was a man Isabella had never seen before. Blood soaked through his white shirt in a spreading stain that looked almost black in the darkness. His left shoulder was higher than his right, his head tilted back against the headrest. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused and confused, then closed again. Isabella did not know that this was Rafael Valenti. She did not know that he ran half of New York's underworld, that 17 men answered to him, that his word was the law in neighborhoods where actual law enforcement had long since given up. She did not know that 3 hours ago he had put 3 bullets in his own brother's chest in a warehouse on the East River. She only knew that someone was dying on the sidewalk in front of her, and she could do something about it. "Help me get him inside," she told Sister Margaret. Together they pulled him from the car. He was heavier than he looked, his body limp and unresponsive, his breathing shallow. Blood dripped onto Isabella's shoes, onto the frost-hardened ground, leaving a dark trail across the shelter's basement entrance. They laid him on a cot in the back corner of the basement, far from where Emma and Daniel slept, far from the other residents who stirred in the darkness but did not wake. Isabella had taken a first aid course when David was sick. She had learned to dress wounds and control bleeding and check for vital signs. Her hands moved with a speed and confidence that surprised her, as if her body remembered how to save someone even when her mind was fractured from grief and fear. She cut away his shirt. The gunshot wound was clean, a professional shot, the kind of injury inflicted by someone who knew exactly where to aim. The bleeding had slowed, which was either good or very bad, she could not remember which. She packed the wound with clean towels. Applied pressure. Checked his pulse at his neck, felt it thrumming beneath her fingers, steady and strong despite everything. Raphael's eyes opened. His hand shot out and gripped her wrist with surprising strength, his fingers digging into her skin. "My daughter," he said, his voice raw and desperate. "Lily. Is she safe?" Isabella did not understand. She was a woman who cleaned other people's messes for $9 an hour, and this man was asking her about a daughter, was gripping her wrist like it was the only thing anchoring him to life. "You're safe here," she said, because it was the only truth she knew. "Just breathe." His eyes closed. His hand released her wrist. And Rafael Valenti, the most dangerous man in New York, lost consciousness in the basement of a Catholic shelter, being tended by a widow with $17 in her pocket and no idea that her life had just collided with a force that would rewrite everything. Morning light filtered through the basement windows of St. Catherine's shelter like pale gold poured through water. Rafael Valenti's eyes opened slowly, fever-bright and searching, scanning the concrete ceiling and peeling paint as if he was trying to remember which circle of hell he'd landed in. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, sickening ache. The gunshot wound had bled through 3 bandages during the night. He'd felt it, waking and sleeping both, that slow seep of his body betraying him. Isabella entered carrying a metal basin of warm water and fresh gauze. She moved quietly, the way she moved through everything, like a woman trying not to disturb anyone, even the air itself. Her brown eyes found him immediately, assessing. She'd changed his bandage at 3 in the morning when his fever spiked. Again at 6 when she thought he was sleeping. "You lost a lot of blood," she said, setting the basin down on a wooden crate. "You should be in a hospital." Rafael tried to sit up. The pain radiated like lightning across his ribs. "No hospitals," he said, his voice cracked from disuse. "Where am I?" "St. Catherine's shelter." "You're safe here." She began unwrapping the bandage, her fingers careful and practiced. The old gauze pulled at the wound slightly and Rafael's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away from her face. "You came through the back door bleeding. I brought you down here where we have privacy." She finished changing the dressing in silence. Her hands were rough, calloused from work, but her touch was gentle. Rafael studied her, the hollows under her cheekbones, the way her dark hair was pulled back in a thin braid, the fact that even exhausted, she had a kind of quiet dignity that reminded him of old churches. "What's your name?" he asked. "Isabella Hartley." Something flickered in his eyes, a recognition she didn't understand. Before he could speak, a child's voice called out from the far corner of the basement. "Bella! Bella, I'm awake!" A 7-year-old girl with dark curls burst from behind a curtain separating the residential area from the medical corner. She moved like water, all energy and light, throwing herself at Isabella. When Isabella caught her, the girl wrapped her small arms around Isabella's neck and Isabella's entire face transformed, the exhaustion lifted, replaced by something luminous. "Good morning, sweetheart," Isabella said, kissing the top of the girl's head. "Did you sleep well?" "I had a dream about snow," the girl said. "And Papa came and we played and we weren't scared anymore." Rafael's breath caught. The girl turned then, curious about the man in the cot, and when she looked at him, Rafael saw his own eyes staring back. His daughter's eyes. Lily. After 4 months of searching, of turning the city inside out, of violence and betrayal and his brother's lies, there she was, impossibly alive and safe, in the arms of a woman he'd met less than 12 hours ago. The girl studied him with the unconcerned assessment of a child. Isabella, noticing the sudden tension in Rafael's body, gently set Lily down beside the cot. "Lily, this is a guest who needed our help," Isabella said carefully. Rafael's voice came out fractured, barely recognizable as his own. "Lily. Baby, it's Papa." The girl's face lit up like a candle being lit in darkness. She climbed onto the cot with careful movements, as if she'd learned to be gentle with hurt people. Rafael's good arm came up and wrapped around her, pulling her close, and for the first time since he was 12 years old, since his mother died, tears streamed down Rafael Valenti's face. The most dangerous man in New York was crying like a broken child, holding his daughter, unable to speak. Isabella turned away to give him privacy, but not before she saw his shoulders shaking. When Rafael finally found his voice, hours later, the sun had moved across the basement and painted everything in amber. Lily had fallen asleep curled against his uninjured side, her small hand gripping his, trusting in a way that made something in his chest feel reconstructed. You've been taking care of her, Rafael said to Isabella, who was preparing soup for the lunch shift. It wasn't a question. For 2 weeks. She came to us from a motel. The police brought her in. No identification, no family contact information. Isabella stirred the pot, steam rising. Sister Margaret thought someone would come for her. No one did. How long has she had the nightmares? Isabella paused. Every night. She wakes up screaming. I've been reading to her, singing to her in the chapel. It helps sometimes. Raphael's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ached. He knew exactly what had happened to Lily. He'd extracted the information from his brother, detail by detail, before Rocco had put a bullet in Marco's skull. His brother had hidden Lily in a motel room, had used her as leverage, had made her afraid of the dark and closed spaces and the sound of footsteps approaching. And this woman, this stranger earning $9 an hour, had been the one to bring light back into his daughter's eyes. Thank you, Raphael whispered. The words felt foreign in his mouth, unused for years. Thank you for keeping her safe. The basement door burst open. Rocco and Sal appeared with guns drawn, faces tense until they took in the scene, their boss alive, bandaged, holding a small child. They froze. Boss, we need to move you immediately, Rocco said, gun lowering slightly. The Corsetti family has been making inquiries. If they discover you're here. Not yet, Raphael interrupted. His hand moved carefully across Lily's sleeping head. Give me 2 hours. Rocco and Sal exchanged a look they couldn't quite process. In 7 years of working for Rafael Valenti, they had never seen him touch anything but a weapon or a tumbler of scotch with tenderness. Boss, Rocco began carefully, we don't know anything about this woman. She could be. 2 hours, Rafael said, and his tone ended the argument. That afternoon, the 3 of them, Isabella, Emma, and Daniel, were transported in a black SUV to Rafael's compound in Westchester. Isabella sat between her children, her hand gripping Daniel's as the car wound through streets she'd never traveled, past neighborhoods where the buildings rose like cathedrals and security gates closed behind them like the doors of another world. The 13-year-old boy stared out the window, silent in the way teenagers are silent when they're terrified. Emma, who was 9, leaned against Isabella's shoulder. Mama, where are we going? Emma whispered. Somewhere safe, Isabella said, though she didn't know if that was true. The mansion rose before them like something from a dream of opulence. White marble columns. Fountain in the circular drive. Windows that seemed to stretch forever. Isabella's stomach twisted. Emma whispered, Mama, is this real? A guard opened the car door. The December air was sharp, cutting, carrying the smell of evergreen and frost. A housekeeper with kind eyes led them through halls where footsteps echoed off marble floors that cost more than everything Isabella owned. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings like captured stars. Armed men stood at every corner of the property, visible through windows that overlooked gardens frozen in winter. The East Wing. 3 bedrooms. 2 bathrooms. A kitchen with stainless steel everything. Isabella walked to the window and looked out at space, endless space, open sky, grass stretching toward a tree line where the property ended and the rest of the world began. She'd been living in a mold-scented basement room that was 8 feet by 10 feet. This room was larger than the entire shelter's residential area. That evening, Rocco appeared at the door of her suite. Mr. Valenti requests your presence. His study, 3rd floor. Isabella left Daniel watching television, an actual television, in a room with heat, and climbed the curved staircase to the 3rd floor. The mansion held its breath around her. Security cameras tracked her movement from corners. The study door was oak, heavy, ancient-looking. When she knocked, Raphael's voice came through solid and unafraid. Come in. The study was all dark wood and leather, books in floor-to-ceiling shelves, a marble fireplace with flames moving like liquid gold. Raphael sat behind a mahogany desk, his left shoulder bandaged beneath a black silk robe, looking like a king recovering from war. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked with measured precision. Outside the windows, the December night was absolute and dark. "Sit," he said. "Not a request." Isabella sat in the leather chair across from him, spine straight despite her exhaustion. The leather was warm, expensive, soft in a way that made her feel obscene sitting in it. "Tell me about yourself, Isabella Hartley," Rafael said. She told him the basics. Widow. 2 children. Work at the shelter for $9 an hour, 12-hour shifts. David had died of cancer 8 months ago. The words came out carefully, edited, revealing nothing of the years of violence that preceded his illness. "You're in debt," Rafael said. It wasn't a question. Isabella's eyes snapped to his. "I make it my business to know things," he continued. $65,000 in medical debt. Your late husband's hospital bills. And Marcus Webb purchased your debt." Her face went white. That's how she knew he already knew everything. That's how she knew this wasn't kindness, it was calculation. "Marcus Webb is my former landlord," she said quietly. "He gave me 10 days to pay or he takes the apartment. He's already sold it to someone else. I don't have the money. What does he want in exchange?" The question hung between them. Isabella looked away, and shame burned through her like wildfire. "The debt doesn't disappear if you can't pay it," Rafael said coldly. "Men like Webb have leverage." "What is he leveraging?" "My body," Isabella whispered. She heard him stand, heard the sound of his hand gripping the edge of the desk, heard the sharp inhale of breath that suggested this news had physically impacted him. But she didn't look up. Looking up would require facing what came next. "I can pay your debt," Rafael said finally. "All of it. Today." Isabella's head snapped up. "What? You saved my life. You protected my daughter when she had no one. You took her in when every law and protocol would have told you to report her, to send her into the system. That's worth $65,000 and considerably more." "I don't want charity," Isabella said, her voice stronger. "I'm nobody. I'm just a maid who cleans other people's messes. I don't belong in your world, Mr. Valenti. And I can't accept money I didn't earn." Rafael came around the desk. Despite the pain in his shoulder, despite the recovering wound beneath his robe, he moved like someone trying not to startle prey. Rocco, standing guard by the door, watched in complete shock. "You're not nobody," Rafael said quietly. "Nobody saves other people's children. Nobody reads through the night when a little girl has nightmares. Nobody spends the last dollars they have on books for a child who isn't theirs." Isabella stood, backing toward the door. "I need to get back to my children." "They're safe," Rafael said. "They're sleeping. Emma is in the guest room. Daniel found a library on the 2nd floor with every book ever written. Lily is in the nursery, finally sleeping without screaming." Isabella felt something fracture inside her, the carefully maintained wall that had held her together through 8 years of violence, through cancer, through homelessness and hunger and the absolute terror of being one bad decision away from losing her children to the foster system. Tears came without warning. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this?" Before Rafael could answer, the sound of running footsteps came from the hallway. Lily appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, rubbing her eyes. "Papa! Bella! Come see what Emma showed me. We made snowflakes from paper and they're beautiful." The moment broke. Isabella wiped her eyes quickly, composed herself, and Lily ran to her, wrapping her arms around Isabella's waist. Isabella rested her hand on the girl's head, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, feeling the weight of her trust like a physical thing. That night, after all 3 children were asleep in the mansion's heated nursery, Isabella found herself unable to rest. She moved through the halls like a ghost, past security cameras that tracked her without judgment, until she discovered a small chapel on the 3rd floor. Stained glass windows. Wooden pews worn smooth from decades of prayer. A single candle burning in a brass holder. She knelt, not to pray but to break. Her body shook with 4 months of grief she hadn't allowed herself to feel. The fear finally surfaced. What if this disappeared? What if Rafael Valenti decided his debt was repaid and they were cast back into the basement? The chapel door opened. "You come here every night," Rafael said from the doorway. "I've been watching the security feeds." Isabella didn't look up. She couldn't. But she spoke the question that had been burning since he offered his help. "What do you want from me?" The silence stretched. Rafael sat in the pew behind her, breathing slowly, his shoulder clearly still giving him pain. "I want to understand," he said finally. "Why does a woman with $17 spend her last money on books for a child who isn't hers?" Isabella turned to face him then. The candlelight caught the tears on her cheeks. "Because no one did it for me." And in the small chapel at 2 in the morning, with the sound of the mansion's heating system humming through the walls, Isabella told him about David. Not the cancer. The years before. The cigarette burns. The belt marks. The bottle broken against the bathroom tile. The way he'd whispered terrible things while he hurt her. The scars on her back that looked like a map of hell itself. Rafael's hand clenched into fists so tight his knuckles went white. "No one knew," Isabella said. "I hid it. And then he got sick and I took care of him anyway, which makes me some kind of broken person. Someone codependent and pathetic." "It makes you a saint," Rafael said, his voice dark with fury. "It makes you someone with a strength most men spend their entire lives trying to achieve." Before Isabella could respond, Lily appeared in the chapel doorway in her nightgown, crying softly. "Bella? I had a bad dream. You went away and didn't come back." Isabella immediately lifted her, felt the small arms wrap around her neck with desperate intensity. She looked at Rafael over Lily's head, saw him watching them with an expression that combined fierce protection with something tender and newly broken. "I'm here, sweetheart," Isabella whispered. "I'm right here. I promise." What Isabella didn't know, what Rafael was only beginning to understand himself, was that his security team had been monitoring his surveillance feeds for hours. They'd seen every frame of his interaction with this widow and her children. They'd seen him lower a weapon he'd never lowered for anyone. And most importantly, they'd seen the exact moment their boss became vulnerable to something far more dangerous than bullets. His love. The charity gala at the Plaza Hotel gleamed with a kind of perfection that only unlimited money could purchase. Crystal chandeliers hung like captured stars above a ballroom where the city's wealthiest moved between tables dressed in fabrics that cost more than most people's yearly rent. 300 donors. 50 media cameras. A live feed broadcasting to every news outlet in New York. Victoria Ashford stood at the podium in a white Chanel gown, her silver hair swept back to show a face that had been sculpted by the finest surgeons money could buy. But beneath the perfection was calculation. Beneath the smile was the poison she had been cultivating for weeks. "Before we announce this evening's donations," Victoria said, her voice smooth as silk wrapped around a blade, "I need to share something with our community. Something about trust. About who we allow into our inner circles." She nodded to the projection operator. The massive screens behind her flickered to life. The room went silent. Photographs began to scroll. Isabella and Rafael in the mansion study at midnight, the image doctored to show them in an intimate moment they never shared. Isabella putting Lily to bed while Rafael stood in the doorway watching, the angle cropped to suggest something sinister. Isabella and Rafael in the chapel, his hand on her shoulder, the image manipulated to show something far more inappropriate. Victoria's voice continued over the images like a narrator of someone else's destruction. "This is Isabella Hartley. A widow. A woman who could not pay her bills, so she did what desperate people do. She attached herself to Rafael Valenti's fortune by first attaching herself to his home. To his daughter." Another photograph flashed. Isabella's hand holding Lily's in the shelter's chapel. Doctored. Distorted. Made to look like predation instead of love. "How long," Victoria continued, "before this gold digger destroys him like she destroyed her last husband? How long before the money dries up and she moves on to the next vulnerable man? The room erupted. Reporters lunged for their phones. Cameras flashed like a thunderstorm. Within seconds, the photographs were spreading across social media, news websites, streaming live on every major outlet. 100,000 people saw them in the first minute. 500,000 by the second. Victoria watched the chaos with the satisfaction of a general surveying a conquered battlefield. She had done it. She had destroyed Isabella's reputation so completely that Rafael would have no choice but to abandon her. No man of his standing could afford to be associated with a woman the entire city now believed was a calculating seductress. What Victoria did not account for was that Rafael Valenti had been monitoring security feeds in real time. At the mansion, Rafael stood in his office with Rocco and Sal flanking him. The television played the gala footage on mute. He watched Victoria's lips move. He watched his own image being weaponized. His face went white. Then red. The kind of rage that made the men beside him take a step back. "Find her," Rafael said, his voice low and lethal like a gun being cocked. "Find Isabella. Now." Rocco was already on his phone. "Boss, she said she was working the final shift at the shelter. She wanted to thank Sister Margaret." "Move," Rafael ordered. "And get the tactical team ready." The shelter sat in darkness at 11:43 in the evening. Most of the residents had been moved to temporary housing. Only Isabella remained, folding linens in the basement laundry room where she and her children had once slept on cots that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound like insects trapped in glass. Cold December air seeped through the high basement window, carrying with it the sharp smell of industrial detergent and something else. Something that made Isabella's skin prickle. The door opened. Marcus Webb stepped inside with 4 men. His shadow stretched across the concrete floor like something alive and hungry. He was smiling. "Isabella," he said, his voice wrapped in false warmth. "I was hoping I would find you here. Alone." Isabella's hand stilled on the linens. "I told you. Rafael paid the debt. I have documentation." "That payment was invalid," Marcus interrupted, stepping closer. His suit was tailored perfectly. His shoes were polished mirrors reflecting the fluorescent lights. "I never authorized his interference in our arrangement." The 4 men moved to block the door. Isabella backed away, her spine pressing against the wall. "Cold cement. So cold it burned." "You know what I want instead," Marcus said. It was not a question. Isabella's breathing quickened. Her hand moved instinctively to her back, to the scars hidden beneath her work shirt. 8 years of David's rage mapped across her skin in patterns like a language written in pain. The marks had faded but never disappeared. They would never disappear. "No one is coming to save you this time," Marcus whispered, close enough now that she could smell his cologne. Expensive. The smell of someone accustomed to taking what he wanted. "Not your children. Not your dead husband. Not Rafael Valenti." Isabella's legs began to collapse. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her back against the cement, her breathing shallow like a wounded animal's. The industrial lights buzzed. The detergent smell burned her nose. The window above showed stars sharp as diamonds in a winter sky that looked impossibly far away. This was it. This was how the story ended. Not with triumph or rescue. Not with a Mafia boss arriving to sweep her into safety. This was how it ended, alone in a basement, owned by another cruel man, powerless and broken and destined for the same fate she had barely survived the first time. Marcus raised his hand. She closed her eyes. Then she felt something in her pocket. The photograph. The one image she had kept from her marriage to David, not from love but as a reminder of what she had survived. She pulled it out with trembling fingers and looked at his face. The man who had burned her. The man who had tried to erase her will to exist. And something hardened in her chest. She had survived 8 years of hell. She had buried a man who tried to destroy her. She had protected 2 children on $17 and the last threads of her dignity. She had read to a frightened child in a chapel at 2 in the morning. She had stood up to a landlord and refused to break. She was not powerless. She was not nobody. Isabella stood up. Her legs shook, but they held her weight. She looked at Marcus Webb and her voice was steady, each word like a blade cutting through the darkness. No. Marcus blinked. No. Get out of this shelter, Isabella said, louder now, her voice filling the basement like light. I don't care who you think you are. I don't care what you think you own. You don't own me. No one owns me. Not anymore. Marcus's smile dropped. His hand came up to strike her. The basement door exploded inward. 12 men in black tactical gear moved like ghosts, filling the space in seconds. Their weapons were drawn but not raised. They did not need to raise them. Rocco led them, his face carved from stone. Step away from her, Rocco said, his voice deadly calm. Marcus stumbled backward. You have no authority here. This is private. Boss's orders, Sal said, appearing beside Rocco. You threatened what's his. Bad move. Rafael appeared in the doorway. His shoulder still bore the white bandage from his injury, but he stood like a king surveying his kingdom. His eyes found Isabella first. He looked at her the way someone looks at the sun after years of living in darkness. Are you hurt? Rafael asked. Isabella shook her head. She could not speak. Rafael's gaze moved to Marcus Webb. The temperature in the basement seemed to drop 10 degrees. Take him, Rafael ordered. His men grabbed Marcus. He struggled, screaming. You can't do this. I have lawyers. I have rights. Rafael stepped toward him, his movements deliberate and controlled like a predator that has finally grown tired of patience. He leaned close so that only Marcus could hear. You touched my family, Rafael said, his voice like thunder wrapped in ice. You have nothing. But Rafael did not kill him. Death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful. Instead came the systematic destruction. By dawn, federal charges had been filed. Fraud stretching back 15 years. Extortion. Tax evasion. The FBI raided Marcus Webb's office at 7 in the morning, agents in windbreakers swarming like locusts, seizing every computer, every file, every ledger that documented his crimes. His assets were frozen within hours. Business partners abandoned him by noon. By evening, Marcus Webb sat in an interrogation room at the federal building, his expensive suit wrinkled, his polished confidence shattered, knowing that his life as he had lived it was over. Victoria Ashford watched the news from her penthouse on the Upper East Side. Her lawyer had called 3 times. Each time bringing worse news. The photographs had been exposed as forgeries by digital forensic experts. Her own crimes were being leaked to every major news outlet. Real estate fraud. Money laundering through her late husband's companies. Bribery of city officials documented in files that Rafael's investigators had somehow obtained. She stood at her window watching the black SUVs pull up to her building. Frost covered the glass, making everything beyond it look fragile and about to shatter. Her phone rang. She did not answer. It rang again. And again. 63 calls. 63 people abandoning her. Partners destroying evidence. Lawyers resigning. By the time federal agents knocked on her door at 6 in the evening, Victoria Ashford was alone in every way that mattered. The arrest played out on live television. Her silver hair disheveled. Her Chanel suit wrinkled from pacing. Her face twisted in rage as cameras captured her being read her rights outside her own building. This is Rafael Valenti's doing, she screamed at the reporters. He's the criminal. He's... An agent cut her off and guided her into the car. 40 years in federal prison, the prosecutor would announce the next morning. Total financial ruin. Every asset seized. Every connection severed. Marcus Webb received 35 years. In the courtroom where his sentence was read, he collapsed trembling like a cornered animal, begging the judge for mercy that would never come. Rafael stood in the back of that courtroom, watching. Justice was not death. Justice was watching your enemies lose everything and knowing they would spend decades remembering why they had ever dared to threaten the people he loved. Word count, 1,847. 6 months had passed since the federal agents took Marcus Webb from the courthouse in handcuffs, since Victoria Ashford's arrest played across every news channel in the city, since the mansion became something other than a cage. Isabella Hartley stood at the kitchen counter on a Saturday morning with flour in her hair and chocolate chips melting between her fingers, and she could not remember the last time she had been this happy without feeling afraid of it. The kitchen was massive, all marble and stainless steel, a room that could have fed 50 people without effort. It was 9:30 in the morning. Sunlight poured through the windows, and the city beyond looked soft and forgiving in a way Isabella had never seen it before. "Mama. Mine has too many eyes." Emma's voice cut through the quiet, bright and demanding and utterly certain that Isabella would know exactly how to fix this pancake emergency. Isabella turned from the stove. Emma sat at the breakfast counter, age 8 now, her dark hair in the same messy knot Isabella wore. Daniel, 5 years old and still bearing the soft edges of childhood, was arranging his chocolate chip pancake pieces into shapes only he understood. Lily, Rafael's daughter, was in the chair between them, swinging her legs and humming a song she had learned in her new school. No basement room. No shelter cot. No counting coins in the dark. "Let me see," Isabella said, and set down the spatula. She moved to Emma's plate, studying the pancake with the gravity of a surgeon examining X-rays. "We can fix this. We can give him a smile instead. Much friendlier." Emma giggled. The sound was like church bells. The footsteps came from the hallway before Isabella heard the voices. Heavy, deliberate, the walk of men who had learned to move through the world as if it owed them the space. Rafael appeared in the doorway first, his presence shifting the air in the room the way a storm shifts the pressure of the sky. He wore a black suit despite the early hour, his dark hair silvered at the temples catching the morning light. Behind him came Rocco and Sal, both built like mountains in designer clothes, both carrying the particular stillness that came from carrying weapons everyone could see. "Papa!" Lily jumped from her chair and ran to Rafael, who scooped her up without hesitation, lifting her so high she laughed. Bella made pancakes with faces. Sad faces, happy faces, and some faces that don't know if they're happy. Rafael looked at Isabella over his daughter's shoulder. His eyes, dark as winter water, held something that made her breath catch. He had looked at her this way every morning for 6 months, as though he still could not quite believe she was real. "Did she?" Rafael asked Lily, but he was looking at Isabella. "Then we should definitely eat them." He set Lily down and moved into the kitchen with the same control he brought to everything, each step deliberate, each motion purposeful. Rocco and Sal remained in the doorway, pretending to study the frost patterns on the windows, but Isabella could feel their attention. In all their years with Rafael, they had never seen him sit at a kitchen counter on a Saturday morning eating pancakes shaped like faces. Isabella served him without speaking. She had learned, in these 6 months, that some moments did not need words. Their fingers brushed when she handed him the plate. The contact lasted just long enough that she felt it everywhere. Daniel looked up from his pancake arrangement. "Do you want to help me make a dinosaur?" he asked Rafael seriously. "I do not know how to make dinosaurs," Rafael said. "That is okay. Nobody knows how to make dinosaurs. I am inventing the first one." Daniel pushed a piece of pancake toward him. "This is his foot." Rafael took the pancake piece. He was a man who had ordered the destruction of his enemies, who had built an empire in the spaces between legality and survival, who had killed without hesitation when killing was required. He examined Daniel's dinosaur foot as if it was the most important architectural decision in New York. Rocco looked away from the window. His shoulders were shaking. He was, Isabella realized with astonishment, trying not to laugh. "I think you need another foot," Rafael said finally. "For balance." By 10 o'clock, the breakfast counter had been transformed into a pancake archaeology site. Lily had abandoned eating to draw pictures of the dinosaur they had built. Emma was teaching Daniel her secret recipe for dunking techniques. Rocco and Sal had been conscripted into the operation and were now genuinely debating whether syrup should be the dinosaur's blood or his sweat. Isabella sat at the far end of the counter, coffee cooling in her hands, watching her children. She could think of them that way now without her chest chattering, learn to take up space in a mansion that still smelled like money and old arrangements. Rafael appeared beside her. She had not heard him move. In 6 months, she had learned that he did nothing by accident. Every movement was chosen. "They are happy," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Isabella whispered. "Are you happy?" She looked at him. At the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a map of violence he never discussed. At the expensive watch that cost more than her entire childhood. At his hands, which had ordered terrible things and were now covered in chocolate chip residue from dinosaur construction. "I am terrified," she said. "Of what?" "That I will wake up. That this is the basement room dream again, and I have been asleep on that cot for 6 months, and you are not real, and my children are still eating from garbage cans behind restaurants." Rafael set down his coffee. He took her hand, and the kitchen faded. Just her and him and the morning light and the weight of his palm against hers. "I have something to show you," he said. "But not now. This moment is for pancakes." They turned back to the counter. Rocco was explaining to Daniel why dinosaurs probably did not eat syrup, but if they did, they would be much happier dinosaurs. Sal was helping Lily draw what she insisted was a dinosaur princess. Emma was negotiating for more chocolate chips with the focused intensity of a diplomat. Outside, the city moved forward. People went to work. People suffered losses they did not yet understand. People made choices in the dark that would follow them for years. But inside this kitchen, with flour dusting the marble and pancake pieces arranged into impossible creatures, Isabella Hartley was not invisible. She was not counting coins. She was not rationing her breath because breathing too much cost energy and energy meant eating, and there was nothing left to eat. She was Bella. Mama Bella. A woman with a family who chose her every single morning. After breakfast, when the children had scattered to various corners of the mansion, Rafael found Isabella in the library. She was researching again, her habit she could not break. The screen showed a nursing certification program at Hunter College. Tuition. Prerequisites. A timeline that began in spring. "You are planning your escape," Rafael said from the doorway. Isabella looked up. "I am planning my future. It is different." She closed the laptop. "I can't stay here forever, Rafael. This is your life. Eventually, your men will expect you to move forward. I have moved forward. I moved to the kitchen at 9:30 in the morning. I built a dinosaur. I held a pancake. For a man in my position, this is enormous forward movement." Isabella stood. "Be serious." "I am being serious. Come with me." He took her hand. He was always taking her hand now, as though he needed the physical confirmation that she was real, and led her through the mansion's hallways. The portraits of Valenti ancestors watched them pass. Men with hard faces and harder lives, preserved in oil and canvas, their eyes following movement through rooms they would never understand. They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, to a wing Isabella had never entered. Rafael produced a key from his pocket and unlocked a heavy wooden door. The chapel was small, intimate, its windows looking out toward the East River. Frost painted the glass in delicate patterns, like lace someone had laid against the panes with infinite patience. Candles burned on a low table. The air smelled like old wood and old prayers and something that might have been hope. "What is this?" Isabella asked. "A place," Rafael said, "where a woman with $17 to her name and a man with everything except what mattered learned to choose each other." Rafael. "Not now," he interrupted gently. "But soon. Very soon. I needed you to see it first." To know that I am not asking you to disappear into my world. I am asking you to build a new world. With me. In this place. These are the only walls that have ever felt like freedom instead of prison. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. She could not speak. Below them, Rocco was helping Daniel construct a larger dinosaur in the kitchen. Sal was braiding Lily's hair. Emma was showing the chef how to properly dunk a pancake without it falling apart, a skill, she insisted, that required precision and respect. Isabella did not know it yet, but in 3 months' time, she would stand in this chapel wearing a simple white dress while Rafael wore the same black suit he had worn the morning of pancakes. Sister Margaret from the shelter would marry them in a ceremony with no press, no society, no one but Rocco and Sal as witnesses and the 4 children sleeping upstairs as blessings. She did not know that Rafael would give her the deed to St. Catherine's shelter, signed over to the Hartley Valenti Foundation, so that she could spend her days saving people the way she had saved him, not with her body or her compliance or her silence, but with her stubborn, impossible, desperate belief that every person deserved to be somebody. She did not know that Lily would call her mama without hesitation or apology, that Emma and Daniel would stop flinching when doors opened unexpectedly, that the basement room would become a memory so distant it felt like something from another woman's life. All she knew, standing in this small chapel with frost on the windows and a man who had chosen to be gentle, was that she was not alone anymore. "I do not know how to stay," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, you do," Rafael said. "You already are. You have been staying since the morning Lily called you Mama. The only question now is whether you choose to keep staying." Outside, the city was cold and brutal and full of people learning what it meant to survive. Inside this chapel, inside this mansion, inside a future she had never believed possible, Isabella Hartley took a breath and whispered the only word that mattered. "Yes." How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.